to one degree or another, we're going to disagree with everyone to some extent, even the closest people to us, right? Like, we're not going to agree with them 100% on everything because they're a different person. So I think being able to tolerate those kind of differences, those different points of view and disagreements while still keeping up some level of connection is a really useful kind of life skill.
Welcome back to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. You can find more podcasts at mailtribune.com. Don't forget to pick up your own copy of Hip Habits, where you will find 6 months of weekly habits that you can practice, focusing on everything from physical, mental, and financial health. You'll find that with the link in the show notes. We are so lucky because today we get to hear from Dr. Edwin S. Brodkin and Ashley Pallathra. They are the leading experts on human connection. They have also just written this book, Missing Each Other: How to Cultivate Meaningful Connections. Edward, or Ted as he goes by, is an Associate Professor of Psychiatry. He is the founder and director of the Adult Autism Spectrum Program at Penn Medicine. Ashley is a clinical researcher and therapist. She is the author of several published research articles and a book chapter in the fields of autism research, social neuroscience, and social emotional functioning in youth. Today, we talk about a lot. We talk about human connection and why it is so important to us as a species, how to connect with someone you fundamentally disagree with, and navigating conflict, social media's role in all of this, and why we feel so lonely. We also talk about the 4 components of attunement and how to practice these in your own lives for stronger connections and even problem solving. We have that and a whole lot more. Let's get to it. Thank you guys for being here. I so appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle.
I just want to jump right in and ask, why is human connection so important?
It is just the essence of everything. I mean, we talk a lot about in our work that it's kind of fundamental to the human experience. And it absolutely varies in terms of how much people crave it, how much they want it to be a part of their daily experience and life experience. But kind of from early on, from when we're born, it's something that we need, that's required to sustain our development, and is essential to sort of the way we build attachment and develop social relationships over time. So, we could talk about it for so long, but I think it's something that everyone craves to a certain extent, but stumbles upon issues on how to maintain and develop it. And so we love being able to kind of talk about this from lots of different angles in terms of how can we support people.
I think it's a little bit scary when we start talking about why human connection is so important. And then we look at the world we're living in where we are not connecting. We're using social media instead. Can you talk to me a little bit about how it's almost as if this need that we have as humans is under attack?
Yeah, it's like we're hyper connected in a way, and yet we're under connected in another way. So we're so connected electronically through social media, through texting and our smartphones. But this really can distract us from live interactions, from the people we're right next to, the people all around us. And so, and then the other thing that happens is on social media and other, big websites is that we get fed a stream of information through algorithms that tends to pull us more and more towards things that we seem to be interested in or seem to express. And this tends to polarize people. So political views and views on all kinds of other things, it just tends to foment divisiveness. So even though the electronic devices seem to connect us, in many ways, they disconnect us.
Yeah. Okay. There is something I want to read from the book, but first I want to get this out of the way. We'll go to this in the book because it comes right out of that. Let's talk about what attunement is and how that makes a difference in human connection.
So we describe attunement as kind of a fundamental social skill. It's kind of this overarching ability to connect, to be in sync and in tune with someone else. And I think it's made up of a lot of different skills. So we do our best to kind of break it down in the book, especially because it can feel very abstract and intangible. We do our best to kind of give examples. So attunement in terms of two people talking and connecting can sometimes feel like somebody really gets you. They really understand you. You feel seen, you feel heard. That sort of ephemeral feeling is kind of what we describe as attunement, but it can also be seen in, lots of other examples, like in groups of people. And we talk about how in music, orchestras working together and feeling really in tune with one another produces kind of a different level of beauty in the sound that you hear, or basketball players driving down the court in sync. That level of connection is what we're sort of describing.
How is it different than empathy?
We think of empathy as being part of it, but not the whole thing. So we break attunement down into these 4 components. We call them relaxed awareness, listening, understanding, and mutual responsiveness. And each of them is kind of a thing unto itself that we could talk about. But empathy comes in the listening and understanding part. So when we talk about listening, part of listening is sort of resonating with the other person, and including emotionally resonating. So like if you, Danielle, were looking kind of sad and I was picking up on that, then I might start to feel sad, like emotionally resonating with you. And so that's part of the listening, part of attunement in our framework. And then in the understanding part, there's something called cognitive empathy, which is more like intellectually seeing things from your perspective. So it's not necessarily an emotional resonance, but it's like I recognize cognitively that you, Danielle, are seeing things differently from the way I'm seeing them. And so I can kind of imagine your point of view versus my point of view and how they're different. So empathy is definitely part of attunement, but it's not the whole story.
Okay. Yeah. So am I understanding attunement correctly, where attunement is I'm feeling what you're putting down, but I also have a space for what I'm feeling too. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was going to add in. That element of balance, I think, is where you can sort of think of attunement as the overarching theme. That balance between understanding yourself and having awareness into how you are feeling, and also what you're bringing into the interaction, and then also how the other person is communicating as well. And there's so much interaction at play in that can make it challenging from different angles in terms of connecting.
I want to read this from the book. Let's see. You wrote, quote, "But attunement skills can serve as tools that help reduce the amount of time spent in those endless cycles of talking at people instead of with people. In especially heated moments, it can seem difficult to pause and implement attunement skills. That's because it is. It takes a good amount of energy and effort to catch yourself and draw on these strategies," end quote. When I was reading this, I was thinking, on social media, what we do is we talk at people. Is it even possible to be attuned with people and how they're feeling, what they're going through as they're sharing their stories, when we're only talking at people on social media?
I don't want to say it's impossible to have attunement on social media, but I think it's really, really difficult. Part of the issue is that on social media, we're not getting the richness of cues that we do in a live interaction. We can't see each other. We can't see facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, anything like that. It's just, a line and a comment. And I also think there's something about the culture of at least some social media platforms that tends to promote divisiveness and this kind of culture of just shouting past each other. Like you shout your opinion, I shout my opinion, and maybe we shout at each other a little bit. But there's not a lot of mutual understanding that's usually going on.
Yeah. I think as you were talking, I think just not being able to see the person and see the person as a person, just like a bot on the internet, shows up for me as a problem with not being able to connect with somebody over the internet.
Yeah.
Do you think this is part of why people are so lonely today?
I think it's definitely a piece for sure, because I think a lot of the loneliness research out there highlights the idea that loneliness can be very stigmatizing, and it can cause this really negative cycle that someone feels about themselves. So you feel lonely, you feel disconnected with other people, and that probably will lead you to not want to connect with others more. So then you're not connecting with people. So then you feel more lonely, and social media is telling you that everyone that you're looking at feels super connected and is having the best life ever. And you're the only one that's feeling lonely. And, that's just going to further perpetuate that feeling. So it's a really insidious cycle, and it's just hard to break out of. And so, part of what we talk about is this idea of, number one, finding ways to acknowledge that it is a shared experience and it's a universal experience to some degree. I think during the pandemic, that's been something that's been highlighted, that everyone across the world felt elements of loneliness to some degree. And in some ways, there's sort of a little beauty in that we can see that we have those similarities among us. But on the day-to-day, it sort of might not help as much, because you're still surrounded by this knowledge that or the feeling that you're the only one.
I want to go from that to this. How can somebody connect with somebody that they fundamentally disagree with? I feel like we're having a hard time with that in our culture right now, but I don't know if that's because most of our connections happening online and we're not doing this attunement.
Yeah, again, it's challenging, especially when, like I said before, with social media platforms, we are being pulled apart even more by these algorithms and so on. But I think that what we say in the book is that you can use this framework of attunement and some of these exercises to help to try to connect with people, even people you fundamentally disagree with. So just to make it really brief about our framework, it starts with relaxed awareness. So this idea that through simple mindfulness techniques that you can take a breath, you can calm yourself down, you can kind of release some of your tension, and then you can go into a conversation in a more kind of centered, grounded state with this attitude that I'm going to try to listen to this person, even if what they say I don't agree with, even if I really, really disagree with it. I'm going to try to listen, hear their point of view, try to understand it, and just go into it with that stance. And if you go into it with that stance and they perceive that you are at least open to hearing them, hearing their point of view, they then in turn might be more likely to be willing to listen to your point of view, even if it is different from yours. Now, that's not always going to work out so well, but it's going to increase the odds. So I think using this approach could hopefully be helpful.
I want to talk about the 4 pillars of attunement. So you just mentioned relaxed awareness. And I love this. I love talking about listening to people in this way, because as a reporter, I had to do that. I mean, before I was a reporter, I knew everything and I was the smartest person in the world. But when you're a reporter and you have to go go to a rally and talk to one person that believes this thing, and you cross the street and talk to the person that believes this thing, you truly do have to just open up and listen. And I think that's one of the best skills probably I've learned in my life, because it's so incredible to be able to see humans as humans, and no matter what their background is or why they believe the things they do. I think that's really, really important as human beings. So you talked about what relaxed awareness is. How can we become people with this if we're not already? Because this is a skill. This is hard.
It is. Do you want to take that one, Ashley?
Sure. I was going to say, it is just like you described, it's a skill. And so I always think of skills like muscles, something that even, everyone is going to have a different starting point of how strong they are in it, but it doesn't mean that you can't grow and you can't develop it. And sort of the way you were describing, like, you had to practice that with your work. It required you to do that. As a therapist, I'm required to do that. But it doesn't mean that other people who don't have that daily experience can't implement it a little bit in their day. And so, for us, we've talked about in the book different exercises that you can use that are very simple, and you can sort of take them with you throughout your day in whatever instance or situation you're in. A lot of it starts with this kind of mindfulness and meditation approach, like Ted mentioned, but we really try and make it limited in terms of the effort that you have to put in, because I think that's first the way to grab people and help motivate them to try it out, and to know that you're not going to go from 0 to 100 in a day. And to really encourage people to implement a little bit of practice of maybe like a couple minutes a day, or even just one mindful breath in your day. If that's where you're starting, great. And then you work your way and you build up that skill. Hopefully kind of motivates people.
I'm also thinking I'm better at this with some people than others. So maybe practice with the people you're better at. You're better at sitting back a little bit and having that relaxed awareness instead of getting ready for debate. How does meditation or mindfulness impact relaxed awareness? How do those things go hand in hand?
Yeah, well, it's we think of it as a sort of a mind-body thing, that we kind of start with the body. So we start with things about your posture, the way you hold your head, relaxing your shoulders, feeling your breath. And if you do this exercise where you feel like your head is a bit suspended from above, your shoulders relax down, you feel a breath, you do that for a few breaths, you can feel yourself physically just start to relax. We talk about different parts of your nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system, which is like the fight, flight, freeze part, where we respond to emergencies and we're really stressed. And then there's the parasympathetic, which is like the relaxation and connection response. And so by taking a few simple physical steps like that, you can activate your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system, and you just have a natural physical relaxation response. And so like Ashley said, if you practice this and it becomes familiar to you, it becomes easier and easier to just call upon that, even in the heat of a moment, even in a stressful interaction with someone.
But I will add, Danielle, just like you said, you should start with easier situations, because you're not going to be able to pull on that in a heated moment. If you haven't practiced it, it won't be as easy.
How does what's happening physically with the body impact what's happening with the head mentally?
Our minds and bodies are so intimately connected, right? I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. And so if your body relaxes, your mind can relax. If your mind relaxes, your body can relax. I mean, they're so tied together. And so you really could potentially work from either end initially. I think we recommend, and we're not rigid about this, but to start with the body because it's so tangible, it's so concrete. It's a good entry point. You know, if we said start with the mind and just relax your mind, people might be kind of like, I don't know how to do that. My mind is racing. I don't know how to relax my mind. But if we have these really tangible things, most of us can feel our shoulders. We can feel if we're holding them up really tense or if we relax them down. We can be aware of our breath, and it's just a nice entry point.
When you're talking about fight or flight, I'm wondering if some of those high contention moments with another person and the inability to connect when we're disagreeing, is that because our fight or flight response is like, oh, this is a life or death situation and you need to fight all you can here? Is that what's happening?
I think it might depend on the person, but I think sometimes when you're in a stressful situation, you get activated to feeling like I need to respond. I need to protect myself, maybe. I need to defend my values and my ideals. I think different people are going to have different, levels of how much they respond in that way. Depending on your life experiences, maybe you've had traumatic experiences or, relationship difficulties that lead you to be extra prepared or extra vigilant, hyper vigilant, like we would say. And so then your systems are overactive even more than typically expected. But yeah, in general, in any sort of stress, any sort of release of cortisol, that system gets activated. You feel like you need to prepare for whatever could come. And I think the problem is too, whether it's a difficult relationship or a difficult conversation or just a stressful day, all of us are generally more activated than, probably generations before. And we're activated for longer periods of time. Our bodies feel like we need to be prepared, even though we're not going to die in this situation. And that overproduction of that stress hormone that we've been talking about is what makes it difficult, and maybe probably we're less used to figuring out how to calm our systems down, because we always feel like we have to be on it. So yeah, starting with the physical helps, because it's one entry point into getting there.
It's unreal to think about how we're more activated than generations before. Okay, let's go to listening. Tell me a little bit about listening.
Yeah, so listening is the next step. And we break listening down into a few things. First of all, by listening, we mean more than just hearing the sound of someone's voice and what they're saying. We mean taking in all of their cues. So again, their facial expression, body language, just taking it all in. So part of listening is just attending to those things, paying attention, looking at the person listening. Another part of it is what we call resonating with the other person. So when you're really attentive to another person, you can start to literally physically resonate with them, in the sense that, like, if you've ever had like a really good conversation with someone and you felt like you had a good rapport, you might notice that your body is starting to mirror their body. Like you're sitting in the kind of mirror position to the way they're sitting, and you may start to smile like you are now while I'm smiling. So there's a kind of physical resonance. You can even measure that at the level of brain waves, like the people's brain waves synchronize. Wow. And then there's also, as part of listening, an emotional resonance. So that, and I think I mentioned this before, like if you, Danielle, start to feel a certain way, let's say you start to feel nervous, then I might just start to feel nervous. There's like an emotional contagion or resonance. And so all those things are what we consider part of listening.
How does someone become a better listener with all of that?
I would say starting with listening to yourself, kind of practicing, an understanding and awareness towards how you're feeling and how you're thinking as well. Because part of that, as Ted was describing the resonance piece, it sort of works the other way as well. If you are noticing the other person is feeling really anxious, and you can utilize and draw on that breathing and that ability to relax your own body, you might then be able to influence and generate more calmness in the interaction. So it's, it feels counterintuitive. Like, why would I listen to myself when I'm trying to understand someone else? But it's really that constant balance that's helpful.
I love this. This is another skill that I had to learn while reporting. Okay. We could do a whole episode on just listening, but let's go to understanding.
Sure. I can jump in and quickly describe understanding is similar in that you are trying to understand all of the cues that you've then just listened to and taken in, trying to understand what someone is trying to communicate, but again, at the same time, trying to understand how your own filters are maybe influencing and impacting how you're understanding someone else. So a big part of understanding is really taking the time to try not to be reactive, to understand what, your biases, your assumptions about the other person, or assumptions about how a conversation should go, might influence how you are interpreting someone and then also responding to them. And that can be, sometimes if it doesn't go well, it turns into this sort of tumble effect where you guys end up just rolling down this hill and no one understands how we got there and how to get out of this difficulty in understanding one another. So it all comes back to that relaxed awareness of taking that pause and allowing yourself to understand those filters.
So if someone's having a conversation and they're saying, okay, I'm listening, the way that I'm understanding this, I've got my own bias back here. So like, this is just not clicking together for me. Like, I think this is ridiculous. Like, my understanding is that what this person's saying is ridiculous. What's the step forward to get from like, okay, that's how do we step over that bias to be able to be there for that person, to connect with that person? I think that's what I'm trying to ask. Is there a next question to ask ourselves or way to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I might say that the challenging thing is to be in a conversation where you really think what the other person is saying is ridiculous, or you completely disagree, but yet remain open to them. So And I think all these things take practice. I think the listening takes practice, the relaxed awareness takes practice, the listening takes practice, and what I'm saying now takes practice. But to get to a place where, you could be listening to someone and thinking, they're just full of it. Like, I don't believe any of this. But I'm not going to shut down, though. I'm going to stay open, and I'm going to keep listening, and I'm going to keep interacting. And you might even explicitly say, like, I don't agree with what you're saying. I have a different point of view, but yet I still want to hear what you have to say. I want to understand your point of view, even though it's different from mine. So you're not shutting down the conversation. You're not shutting down the connection. And when you think about it, I mean, to one degree or another, we're going to disagree with everyone to some extent, even the closest people to us, right? Like, we're not going to agree with them 100% on everything because they're a different person. So I think being able to tolerate those kind of differences, those different points of view and disagreements while still keeping up some level of connection is a really useful kind of life skill.
Mm-hmm. I think, like, just hearing you say, I may not agree with you, but I want to hear you. I just think that's so powerful. I just think that's so incredible to be able to sit with another person that you don't agree with and be able to just understand, which is the pillar or the component of attunement. Okay, let's get to mutual responsiveness. So we have, so we can get this last one in here.
Sure. This last pillar is sort of putting it all together. It's like I've collected all this information. I've been trying to regulate myself as well as understanding the other person. But now it's like, what do I do? How do I continue this dynamic and respond and sustain this interaction? And there's a lot of different elements of mutual responsivity. I think one of the biggest ones we start with is this idea of meeting someone where they are. And that idea of staying in the flow with them throughout a conversation can give you the best chance of the conversation going well, of the dynamic going well. I think we've touched on it without labeling it as meeting each other where they are, but that's the essence of cultivating a genuine curiosity and openness to someone else, despite what they might be giving to you. And I'll add to, like, another element of mutual responsivity is knowing that attunement is not going to be constant. You're not going to be able to constantly be connected with someone well, in sync with them. There's always going to be breaks in connection, and that's okay too. And that's to be expected. That's normal. But meeting someone where they are requires that you begin again, that you try again, that you find a different avenue. Know that you're going to be growing and evolving in this skill, just like a muscle, like we've been saying. And so, having compassion towards yourself, I think then allows you to generate compassion for someone else.
Yes, I love that. It's just like the listening to yourself. The more you practice that, the better you get at it. The more you practice the compassion and grace for yourself, the more you have for other people. What do you think? Who is this attunement for? Are we trying to be attuned with everyone that we're meeting and talking to?
To different degrees, maybe. Of course, there's different kinds of relationships we have, right? We have the people we're closest to in our lives, and then we have all the way to people we don't know at all or we're casually interacting with. What we argue in the book is that this idea of attunement is a really versatile skill, and it can be used in so many different situations. Of course, you wouldn't interact with the same kind of closeness with a kind of a stranger or someone you meet casually, but nevertheless, these skills of relaxed awareness, listening and understanding, even in a quick interaction, can be really, really useful. So I think it can be used in different ways, and it's a really versatile approach.
What do you think the difference is in our culture if we all start practicing this? What would be the difference that we would see?
It would be a beautiful world, is what our goal is. But I think one thing to take away, because I think, sometimes people will think about that and be like, that's a great idea, but it's not likely or it's not going to happen. But one takeaway that we try and promote is that even just a little bit of movement in this area can have really dramatic impacts on your own life. And then ideally, if it's has impacts in your relationships on one-on-one, it can over time have impacts on a more kind of community level, and ideally on a more systems level as well. Because a lot of the issues that we are facing require connection. It's going to require us to learn how to communicate and be genuinely open to one another. So it sounds like it's going to be a big battle to do that. But if you just take those small steps, I think you'll see some significant differences.
And I think it gets easier. Ted, it looked like you had something to say at the beginning when I asked the question. Did you?
I just thought it was a great question. And I loved Ashley's answer that it would be a beautiful world. But I agree with what Ashley said, that, our problems today, from COVID-19 to racism to climate change to all kinds of huge global problems, absolutely require an ability to communicate, cooperate, and work together. And we seem to be kind of moving in the other direction of more divisiveness. So I think our world really needs this.
Yeah, I agree. If only I could send a copy to every politician of the book. Okay. Last question I'd like to ask all my guests. We'll wrap up with this. What is your number one tip to living a happier life, in the good, the bad, and the in-between?
That's a big question to land on. I will go back to what I said, which was self-compassion. I think that piece can drive a lot of happiness in a lot of different areas. And sometimes it's kind of like the underlying thing that's holding us back, or holding back happiness in different areas. So the more you can kind of direct that compassion for yourself, like you might have for others, you'll see some big effects.
I love that. Ted?
Yeah, and I'll stick with the theme of the book, like the quote from E.M. Forster that starts off the book, like, only connect, like that, don't let the forces that want to pull us apart, whether it's algorithms online or crazy politics or whatever. Just try to invest in connecting with yourself and connecting with the people around you. And that will really help you to be happier.
I love that. I also loved the quote in the book. I wrote it down. The moments in which we feel heard are memorable. And I just think that's huge, that we can offer that to so many people, to give them that opportunity to be heard. Thank you guys so much for your work and for coming on the podcast to share. It's been a great conversation. I've loved it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was great.
Hope you enjoyed this conversation.